Well, we're back again. One more episode of the Deeper Dive podcast. We are in a series called Weeds in My Garden, where we're talking about mental health. And we're just being honest about mental health. So, thus far, we've talked about anxiety and loneliness, and today, burnout. And again, I have my wonderful co host and guest, Annie Snyder. I did not introduce myself. I am Nate Bush, lead pastor of New City Church, and so glad to have you on this podcast, this Deeper Dive podcast, where we talk about what we've been talking about on Sunday morning, but we just talk about it in a more conversational podcast format. I have a guest with me, Annie Snyder. Annie, introduce yourself, what you do, and why you're here.
Hey guys, Annie Snyder. I am the owner and clinical director of Albuquerque Mental Health, which is an outpatient counseling agency here in Albuquerque.
Fantastic. All right, Annie, we talked about burnout today, and just any takeaways from you off the top, just stuff that was like on front of mind as you're listening to the topic of burnout. Have you had any clients dealing with burnout in the past? How have you helped them? Floor is yours. Just top of mind responses to what you heard today.
So a couple things came to mind, and I think I think we're kind of hitting the top three. I call them ugly cousins of each other. You can't have burnout without anxiety. Loneliness comes with anxiety. Burnout leads to loneliness. That usually if you have one of these three, you may have two or you may have three. And so it was really only a matter of time before we started talking about a concept that, again, kind of like anxiety, also loneliness, that some of us have had at some point. If you're a grown-up, if you have a job, if you have kids, if you have anything where you're pushing over and over again and it's routine, it's going to happen. So if it hasn't happened to you guys, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so I think a really cool thing to talk about now is if it's happened, how to pull yourself out of that. And if it hasn't happened, it's going to happen. So how can you prep for if and when it happens?
That's so good. There's no shortage of metaphors to use to describe burnout today. I talked about trying to, you gear up when you're under stress and you just kind of, go to the next level. You take it up a notch, and kind of burnouts when you run out of that kind of gearing up space, or to use another term, you hit a wall and you're like, like you said just now, like, you're grown up and eventually, you're going to hit a wall. There's going to be a limit to what you can do. And when you hit that wall, what do you do about it? And man, we talked about that wall pretty openly today. Anything about like, what do you do about when you hit that wall, when you've burned out, when you're experiencing that kind of that really low motivation, feeling like, man, I don't have it in the tank anymore. I've kind of run out of gas, but there's still more stuff to do. What have you told your clients? How have you dealt with it in the clinical setting?
So unlike anxiety, a little bit unlike loneliness, burnout, you really only realize that you have it when you're in it. And when you're in it, that's when hindsight kicks in. Rarely do people say on a scale of 1 to 10, with like 1 is you're great, 10 is you're like, I can't do anything. At a 3, 4, and a 5, you're like, I'm heading towards burnout. I should be mindful of that. That rarely happens. It's when you're that 8, 9, and a 10, and usually something happens to you that you take a step back and you're like, for the last, every podcast that I've listened to is like, I was operating on high for 2 years. I was doing this for a year. It's always hindsight. It amped up and then it crashed. And so I think that if you take the concept of this almost as an injury, that it is an injury. In order to heal any injury, you have to rest. Like if say I have a sprained ankle, and I'm a runner, no one would ever expect me to push through that pain. But for whatever reason, our culture is an outcome-driven culture, and it's almost prideful, and it's encouraged to push through. And if I could just do this, on the other side, there's going to be rest. All that's going to do is continue to injure you more and more and more until it breaks. And so I think one of the things that I tell clients is if it happens, like I said, it's always going to be hindsight. So if that happens, you have to take a step back and say, okay, for the last X amount of time, what was happening? Was I not eating? Was I not sleeping? I loved that you talked about, I call them protective factors that you have control of. A lot of times you may not have control over the hours at your job, but you have control over staying up until 12 o'clock at night, drinking the night before and eating crap. And so parts of your world that you have control over, you have control over your sleep. You said that eating healthy, exercise is huge. And if you can control what you can control, that's going to help. It's going to help heal you, and it's going to prep you to be stronger here on out.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I mean, Annie, I really struggle with that part of the message this week because, sometimes, as a communicator, you want to say something really profound. You want to, have that statement that people walk away with and go, okay, I put that in my hip pocket. I had one of those, today, like when your output exceeds your input, your upkeep becomes your downfall, or your upkeep, leads to burnout. That's a, kind of catchy little phrase. But to end the message with, okay, God cared for Elijah by not like saying, hey, you goober, you lack faith, just muscle up your faith. God
Mm-hmm.
says, eat some bread, drink some water, get some rest. And
Take it out.
to me, that it doesn't sound super complicated, but man, it is easier said than done sometimes. I think it's like
Mm-hmm.
you might even know that's something you need, but when you're in a down spot, like how do you find the discipline to, all right, eat right, drink water, get your rest, go to a quiet place, listen to God, embrace community, those people around you that you need. It feels like when burnout, the kind of part of burnout that's tough is that if you're really in a burnout flame out, your motivation levels are really low. And so what do you say to somebody who's like, okay, my motivation level is like super low.
Yeah.
I hear
Yeah.
you. And, is it really that simple? Just eating and sleeping and drinking water?
It is on paper, Nate. It's
Yeah.
not for, and I don't practice what I preach. So just hear this. It is it's not doing what you know you need to do to take care of yourself tomorrow. I'm constantly telling clients, like I do this all the time. I take care of Annie tomorrow so that Annie
Mm,
tomorrow is going to be really proud of Annie today, that she
yeah.
did whatever it is that she needed to do. I may not want to wake up early. I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to, whatever. And so I'm like, okay, I don't want to do it. Annie
Yeah.
tomorrow is going to be really glad. And so part of that is that it's not about you right now, and it's not a quick fix. It's not, it may not even help. Drinking that one glass of water, it may not change your whole world, but if you make a habit of that, I promise, and I make few promises in
Uh-huh.
counseling, if you take care of all that, I promise you it will help. And
That's
so
so
having
good.
an accountability partner, having someone check in on you, like I complain about everything. If I complain about I'm tired and whatever, my husband's always like, have you had enough water? Did you drink water? And every time I'm like, oh, you're right, I didn't. And it's these small things that really add up over time.
It's so
And
true. I mean,
so,
I think that future you thing is really helpful, Annie, because I think that when you're in when you're in the well, the way I said it today is you have control of your mental health, you have control, some control of your mental health, some control of your physical health, some control over your relational health and your spiritual health. And those are things that you can really do things to invest in.
mhm,
Situational health, I mean, you can do things with yourself in bad situations, and some people do that. But situational health sometimes it's just like this, like stuff happens.
mhm,
And it's part of that hindsight you were talking about earlier of like, oh, I've reached a burnout. How'd that happen? It's usually because I wasn't investing in those early areas of life that I do have like a lot more control
mhm,
over. I wasn't investing in my mental health. I wasn't sharpening the saw, so to speak, and wasn't investing in my physical health. I wasn't drinking water, getting sleep, and I was in a vulnerable moment, and the situation happened, and it threw me over. As that's what the passage we talked about today at church was Elijah getting this message from Jezebel, and so many people can relate to getting that message, or that email came across at the wrong time, or that message I got from my spouse or my child at the wrong time put me over the edge. And it has
mhm,
everything to do with like the person yesterday not being
yeah.
responsible for the person
Mhm.
today, right? And so that's a great place to start for motivation. That really does help.
Well, and I also think that getting to know yourself, to know what time of
Mhm.
day is a time of day that you have higher productivity, the time of day that you are just grumpy, and
Yeah.
to put, if you have agency over this, I understand not everybody has that, but if you
Yeah.
are not an evening person, do not plan to do a really important, like, I don't know, something with your supervisor at the end of the day. If you're an AM person, plan that for 8 o'clock. I rarely go out to eat with people to like check in with them at night because I'm not an evening person. I'm like, AM, we can go have coffee, we can get breakfast. And so I know times of the day that I am more optimal to accomplish things. And so I know that I'm not going to put anything on the calendar at a particular time because I'm not going to accomplish it. I'm going to be mad. I'm going to be tired. I'm going to be grumpy. Then I'm just going to be like, well, screw it. I'm not going to do anything else after that.
Yeah.
And so if you have agency, I call it color coding my calendar. I have green tasks, I have yellow tasks, and I have red tasks. Greens are very low energy. I enjoy them. I could do them often. Yellow ones are ones that I know I may not like choose to do, but I have to do. Red tasks are ones that I see that on the calendar and I just get, ugh. And so I try to put as many green tasks on the calendar as I can. I put them ahead of time. I actually color code them on my calendar.
Yeah.
And when I know, I look at my calendar, I see a red task coming up. I know to prep myself and to plan and to not have two reds at a time. So I don't put two really draining clients at a time. I'll put one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and I'll kind of toggle them with tasks and people and places that are not as draining. And so I understand not everybody has that agency, but really if you're at a job 8 hours, you still have 16 more hours in your day that you can have agency over. And so if it's waking up an extra half hour, nobody likes to wake up an extra half hour, but really the sun's not up, you're going to accomplish a lot more. Or that extra half hour at the end of the day where you put your telephone down, you check your emails at a chunk of time. And it's really, I'd call it working smart, not hard. And I think our culture says you have to work really hard, and that's what's tiring.
Oh, that's so good. I think working smart. Okay, I'm gonna throw work smart at you. Okay, it's the end of the day, and you're like on the precipice of burnout, and you have more going out than you have coming in, and you're looking for a way to wind down at the end of the night. Like, why is turning to alcohol or a substance at that time just a no-brainer? Don't do it. Just don't do it. That's not what your body really needs. Even if what your body's craving at that time, it's not what your body really needs. And again, I'm not like anti-alcohol here. That's not the whole point. But I am anti-using alcohol as a coping skill or mechanism. Why is it a bad recovery method? Getting that, whatever that is, that nightly sort of fix of alcohol or even negative foods like sugary foods, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Why is that a bad fix to burnout?
That's a really great question. And I appreciate that you put alcohol or food or anything. Anything in excess is problematic. Anything.
Right.
And so it's just easy to say alcohol because that's kind of the culture thing, is that our brains are smart, but our brains are lazy and they're quick to jump to what we know is true. And so if at about 3 o'clock, I know in 2 hours, I'm getting that glass of wine and my brain is already primed to that, then I'm creating that neural pathway to that is my only option. And that's not healthy when with anything, when our brain automatically jumps to, oh, I get to go out to eat. Oh, I get to have that glass of wine. Oh, I get to go do whatever. That what you're trying to do is have options. Like it could be a glass of wine. If happy hour gets canceled, okay, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do this. And so anything that your brain automatically jumps to, this is my solution in an hour, is problematic. And I think alcohol as a whole, when you were talking about earlier, that alcohol is a depressant, a lot of people assume, well, no, alcohol makes me happy. It's not a depressant in that it makes you depressed. What it does is it actually depresses your frontal cortex, which is responsible for judgment, logic, and reason. And so what happens is 2-3 drinks in, your judgment, logic, reason is depressed. So then you end up oftentimes making other choices that aren't really great choices. And then that adds into the anxiety and the shame and all those other things that we talk about. And so I would say until you have a schedule that involves other options, try taking alcohol out of it. I have never met a person who quit drinking that regrets it.
Hmm.
Most people who say that they drink too much are like, I would love to quit drinking so much, or I would love to quit eating that, whatever it is. So try it. If you are that one person that drinking half a bottle of wine at night really like helps everything, cool, but it probably isn't.
Right. Yeah. I like that idea of training your mind and creating a dependency upon something. And I would add, as a pastor, creating a dependency upon a thing other than God as your relief and your hope. And you may not be as
Mm-hmm.
bold as saying, "Oh, I'm hoping in my glass of wine," but it is a kind of hope when you put it out there in the future and go, "This is the thing I'm going to work for." Is until I
Mm-hmm.
get home, I get to have this glass or half a bottle or whatever of wine. That's a it's a bad training of the mind. All right, I want to run through these 6 stages of burnout from Dr. Wes Beavis. So these are written specifically for ministry burnout and his PhD research. But I wanted to get your feedback on any of these, and I gave a little quiz in service, and I'll run it by you guys here in a second. But just the 6 stages are this. The first stage was emotional exhaustion. That's just kind of like being like just emotionally, I'm out of gas. The second stage to burnout is this increased frequency and duration of negative self-assessment, and that's like, I suck at this, I'm not any good at this. And the third step was loss of emotional stability, and that's when you get really like, okay, I'm fragile, sensitive, where you would have resiliency in the past. When you're in the kind of on the precipice of burnout, you're starting to feel lack of resiliency, things that you could handle before you can't handle anymore. So you have loss of emotional stability. Isolation was where I think the
Mm-hmm.
you start to really dig into, like, okay, this is like real serious, when you're like afraid to see
Mm-hmm.
people, afraid to be around people, avoiding people. The fifth, diminishing work effectiveness. And the
Mm-hmm.
sixth one is identity impairment, where you're like, you move from I suck at this to I suck, or I failed at this to I'm a failure, and beginning to sort of embody those worst traits about yourself. Any thoughts or feedback on those 6 kind of steps to burnout that
Yeah.
Dr. West kind of lays out, or areas where you've seen, okay, that's a place where I've seen it like that. And the one place I'm curious for your feedback on is that isolation factor, how that
Mm-hmm.
can sometimes
Yeah.
manifest when we're not doing well. Yep.
So I would say if you put these in order, one, two, three, four,
Yeah.
five, six, and you draw a line under emotional instability, or dropped emotional stability
Yep.
and isolation, I think that is when it turns to like a check engine light to
Yep.
problematic. I think as
Yeah.
long as you're sort of hanging out in the emotional place, because again, if you can remember from podcast number 1, if you can name it, you can change it. When you're
Yeah.
in that emotional place, it's
Yeah.
normally not necessarily what's happening, it's how you're interpreting it. It's what
Yeah.
does this say about me as a person? So let's say you're really irritated at your job because your supervisor did something. It's not necessarily that your supervisor asked you, to do a project. It's that you stayed up really late and you're tired and all this stuff. So you're
Yeah.
creating this narrative of what does this say about me? And so usually at this point, your emotional reaction is coming out of your interpretation of it. And so I
Uh,
think all of that, you can do some, it's called cognitive behavioral treatment. You can do some kind of like, I call it mind management about, okay, maybe this is true. What else is true? What do I have control over this? The problem with isolation is that isolation takes an off ramp where all this stuff that's happening with 1, 2, and 3 are going to be perpetuated, and you no longer have an off ramp, and it's all turned inward, and you really have no place to challenge that and to prove it otherwise. Because if you're isolated, you're not interacting with other people to
oh, that's
challenge
good.
that, to pull you out of that, to hold up other things as truth. And so 1, 2, and 3 are just going to continue to snowball. and they're going to get quicker and louder and uglier, and it's going to be inside, and you have no one to talk you out of that. And so I would say we talked about that hindsight where you're looking back at what point did you go either consciously or unconsciously into isolation. And
Hmm.
so then you know that next time, okay, if and when X, Y, and Z happens, that's what I tend to isolate. That is when it can turn problematic. And I know that we're going to talk about depression next week. I think isolation is the precursor to depression.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it does. And I think that's like the when the check engine lights are going off. What I'm hearing you say is like the real challenge point becomes if you're isolating and you've combined that with like the negative self-assessment and you've combined that with sort of the existential questions of like, am I even valuable anymore? Am I useful to the
Mm-hmm.
world anymore? The challenge is if you're isolating, there's nobody there to contradict you, and
Mm-hmm.
you've made your voice supreme in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
but you're
Mm-hmm.
also in your unhealthiest place, and so you've given the most unhealthy
Yeah.
voice in your life, which is yours at that particular point,
Mm-hmm.
the most weight in
Yeah.
assessment, and that's like, whoa,
Mm-hmm.
that's a really dangerous place to be. Yeah,
Yeah. And so I think if you're talking about you're dropping in your effectiveness at your job and
yeah,
just your relationships, what happens when you're isolated is that you say, "Oh, here is so number 1, number 5, here is more proof about how X, Y, and Z I am." And it turns into almost like a catch 22.
hmm,
And so it's not necessarily that you're having like more problems elsewhere. It's
yeah,
as a result of all these things that have progressed. Now it's happening. um it's brighter, it's louder, um and it's a lot uglier, and it's a lot more painful.
okay, all right. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put the assessment in the show notes for you to take, and so you can do it on your own. It basically you kind of rate 1 to 5. And it's on each of those 6 ideas of kind of road to burnout. I'll put it in the show notes. You can take it on your own. Dr. West says if you're at 19 or more, you're in a burnout zone. If you're really high, you're close to 25 to 30, which is like a max score. Then you really need to see somebody to get some help in your burnout scenario. I want to turn the conversation for final minutes just for your input, Annie, on God's dealing with Elijah. And so I want you to put you got your therapist cap on, and you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at God, and he sends an angel to
Yeah.
tap Elijah on the shoulder and say, "Hey, eat something, drink, take a nap. Eat something and drink something.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go." And then God like does this performance art. It's loud, it's noisy, it's windy, it's earthquake stuff, it's fire, but he's not in any of the noise. He comes
Mm-hmm.
to Elijah in a place of quiet, and it's a low and quiet voice that God speaks that Elijah is able to hear. And I think that in all that performance art, God is doing some mending of the soul for Elijah and kind of
Mm-hmm.
slowing some things down. But as you hear like sort of God dealing with Elijah and his burnout, from your therapist seat, what do you
Mm-hmm.
see in the
Mm-hmm.
wisdom of God and the way He's dealing with Elijah in that context?
I think all of us who are parents, we see a lot of positive parenting that God really did with Elijah. If I have a toddler, I have 2 high
Yeah,
school kids now. If I had a toddler and I knew she was tired, it was time for her nap, I would not drag her to go to Smith's or to do a quick errand because she's tired. I would
yeah,
say, no, we're going to go home. We're going to have a snack. We're going to take a nap because I know that about my child. And a lot of times it's easy enough as eat, sleep, drink some water, we were talking about earlier. And so
yeah,
he really it wasn't complicated. He was like, this is what you need. Then you're going to do it again. Then you're going to do it again. And it's not just a one time thing. He's helping him create habits. We're going to do this every
yeah.
day for 40 days. And that's what's going to help you heal. And so I think I just was thinking, if you think about toddlers and kindergartners never say, I'm so burned out. They're tired. But then they take a nap and they're rearing to go again. Like children never just get tired of, you know, I mean, they maybe get tired of going to school, but they always have an eagerness for what's the next thing I'm going to do, because hopefully most of the time they're eating relatively well. They're not drinking a ton of caffeine. They're not drinking alcohol. They're sleeping, what, 8 to 10 hours? How many of us are sleeping 8 to 10 hours? And so I think he takes just a very non-complicated parent role and saying, this is all you need, and I'm not going to overcomplicate it, which I think humans, especially the Western cultures, we tend to overcomplicate a lot of stuff. And we get that like extra Apple Watch to check our REM sleep, and we do the heart rate monitor for the exercise. It's just, go back to his parents, how all of us parent small children, and it's not super complicated. I think that God understood our humanness in that and our capacity to overcomplicate everything. And he's like, I'm going to make it really easy for you guys. And he made
So
it easy, and we still overcomplicate it.
I think that's what makes like from a preaching standpoint sometimes a text like this easy and hard at the same time, because it's easy to
Mm-hmm.
say, eat right, drink plenty of water, get enough
Yeah.
sleep, get quiet with God. It's easy to say that. Um, get around community. We didn't read the passage today, out loud, but just after this, God sends Elisha as a companion and co-prophet and the laborer and the work, and so reestablishes community as a part of that. Um, but what's challenging is really convincing a Western mind, to your point, like an
Mm-hmm.
American mind, that you do have limits, and that there are limitations you
Mm-hmm.
need to find a way to impose on yourself. And I'll give you a passage I read today that was really stuck out to me this week was Psalm 103. For he knows our frame, he remembers that we're dust. Like, it's good to know that
Mm-hmm.
God knows, hey, you're limited. But man, some of the stuff you've already given, like the tools of like knowing your limits. All right, red zones in your calendar versus green zones in your calendar. You can't go a long period of time without enough sleep. You can't go a long period of time without eating right and drinking plenty of water. Is there anything else you can think of that would be helpful for somebody who's going, okay, I know that I've been living a
Mm-hmm.
life without limits. I'm on the throes of burnout here, and I need help setting
Mm-hmm.
some limits and saying no to some things. How would you advise if somebody was presenting that problem to you in a therapy session, going, "I just don't know if I have the willpower. I don't know if I
Mm-hmm.
can do it. I've tried before and I've failed in the past.
Yeah.
Starting new habits is hard for me." What would you say to that person sitting across the table from you?
Yeah. So I hadn't intended on talking about this concept, but it came up.
Yeah.
I actually tell every client in August. So I've had clients I've worked with for years, and I'm like, it's August, time for my August talk. I tell people January is the worst time of year to make New Year's resolutions. Like
Yeah.
January, it's cold, it's pitch black at 5 o'clock. You've eaten too much, you're broke. Like no one's going to the
Yeah.
gym in January. Like it's just not a great idea. August, even if you hated school as a kid, everybody remembers August and September of like going back to school and getting the new haircut and the school supplies. And we all like talked about what kind of a kid am I going to be? You're organized, you have all A's. And it's really just a time, August is a time of like hope and anticipation. Like September's coming around the corner. You can almost smell the green chili. No one in New Mexico hates like fall in Albuquerque, right? Everybody loves it. And so it's
Yeah.
just this natural anticipation. And so I tell people August is a really great time to implement New Year's resolutions. So if you're not exercising, try going for a walk. It's not, I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of hot right now, but like it's not, the sun still comes up early, it stays up a little bit later. And so try to implement small changes now, from now to the end of the year, because I can promise you in November, no one's going to start going to the gym. No one's going to start making healthy habits now. And so you really have this chunk of time that is a little bit of a clean slate to push through. And Annie now is going to be really happy that Annie in November created habits. And so it really is just the clean slate time of year that like resonates with all of us.
I love it.
So
So
small changes. Do not go crazy. Don't say I'm going to run a half marathon. Go on like a power walk. Go
yeah.
small things. Tweak something in your diet, drink a little bit more water, just try small things. And I understand that if you're like in it and you're in pain, everything I'm telling you is probably irritating. I understand that if you scored that 22, 23, I'm annoying. And I understand that. And so I'm talking to hopefully more of the people that may have been like on that cusp or even a little bit lower. That chunk of people, now's that time to plan for when you are going to be at that 28, 29. The other chunk, go to counseling. It really helps to have an outside person kind of help you. You are injured. If I had a broken wrist, I would not just try to strong arm my way through it. I would go
Right.
and I would say, you're the expert. You need to tell me what I need to do. So if you are in that higher category, go get counseling, talk to a person that you trust, reach out. You are injured.
That's
Last thing I
good.
want to say,
Go ahead.
oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, I was gonna say
No, go ahead.
the last thing I want to say about that is if you took this quiz today and you scored relatively low. So like I actually scored relatively low today because my kids haven't got back to school yet. They go back tomorrow. And so I'm like cruising on the end of summer. I'm like ready for the kids to go back to school. And so I know that just naturally I'm in a place right now where it's about to ramp up. And so
Yeah.
if you scored relatively low now, really take some inventory on like what's happening right now in your life that's causing it to be a little bit lower. How's your eating? How's your sleep? How is all of that? How's your calendar? I don't have a ton of stuff on my calendar now that I've been intentional. Coincidentally, I'm not stressed out. And so take this quiz periodically. And if it is relatively low, take inventory of what am I doing in my life now that it is low to create habits in October when stuff is picking up, school kids sports are picking up, that you have a lot more external expectations of you. And it's okay to
That's
tell people, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. You don't have to have an excuse. You don't need to feel guilty if it's not agreeing. Tell them, no, I can't.
That's so good. I'm gonna read all six questions now. We've talked about it a couple of times, and
Okay.
so if people are listening in, they're going, okay. What you talked about grading it 1 to 5. I haven't listened to the sermon yet. I guess it's about Elijah. All right, so all that did happen in the message, and I gave this assessment. I got this from Dr. West, and before I read it, I will say just to dovetail on what Annie just said. When I met, I scored really high on this a little bit ago, about a year ago, and my score was like off the charts. Like I was feeling really a lot of pressure, and I needed help meeting with a professional person in my life who was a therapist who said, "All right, let's just spend a session on deciding what I say yes to and what I say no to, and just having an outside
Mm-hmm.
voice, like helping me make decisions." Excuse me, because I was depleted emotionally at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Decision making is one of the things that was impaired. Just like I don't know what to say yes to, what to say no to, and guilt and all that. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
just having somebody to talk to and say, "Hey, help me out with this," can go a long way. So yes, thumbs up and affirm all that Annie just said on that one. All right, here are the six questions. Do I feel overextended and emotionally depleted? 1 to 5. Are my thoughts regularly trending toward the negative about myself and others? 1 to 5. Is there a growing presence of depression, anxiety, sleep difficulties, loss of personal discipline, or having a short fuse? All right, you rate that 1 to 5. Fourth question. Am I avoiding people, preferring to be alone, and feeling shame? 1 to 5. All right. Fifth question. Is my avoidance increasing and my productivity diminishing? And the last question to rate 1 to 5 is my identity shaken? And so you go through that list, and that's what we're talking about when you're scoring, in that 19
Mm-hmm.
plus range. That's where you're like, okay, I got to take some action. You got something
And
to
I
add?
would also,
Yeah.
yeah. I actually, this just kind of hit me. It seems like each of those questions are kind of aligned with the 1 through 6 categories that grow
Yes.
increasingly problematic. And so I
Yes.
think it was interesting because as I was taking that quiz in church, I scored higher on the earlier questions and
Hmm.
lower on the questions towards the end. So I would
Yes.
say, as kind of a compass, if you
Yes.
scored uh, three or higher on the last three questions, that's going to carry more significance than if you scored higher on questions one, two, or three. So, like question number one, tied with being emotionally exhausted. Question number two, tied with the increased negative assessment. And so, know if you scored higher on like one, two, and three, you're still in the maybe check engine,
Mm-hmm.
like or about like an oil change. An oil change is
Yes.
coming down the pipe. Keep your ear out. If you scored high on the ending questions, that's like alert is happening. And I don't
So
know if that
good.
was on purpose, but
No, that is on purpose. Absolutely.
okay,
And
cool.
he's all come from Dr. West, and he's been good to me. He's on tap next weekend to talk about
He'll be here
depression
next
and
week.
suicide. And so I'm so
I should be
excited.
happy
Also,
about
we have
that.
a no. Well, we are happy because people are going to be cared
It's great to
for.
have an expert. This
Yeah,
is his
it
jam.
is.
He's amazing at it.
He's so good. And in the evening, if you haven't registered yet for the we have a parent and student mental health summit in the evening. And if you are an educator, a lot of educators signed up today. So if you're an educator, it's good for you to be there. Even if you don't have a middle school or high schooler yet, if you have a middle school, high schooler, be there. Invite your sports teams, invite your friends. Dr. West is going to help us to talk with our kids about mental health, which is what Gen Z all the data is showing is struggling more than any other generation
The kids
previous
are
with
not
mental health.
okay, guys. The kids are not
Not
okay.
okay. And we need to be resourced to help. And so we want to be
Yeah.
resourced to help. Annie, you're a rock star. Thank you so
Looking
much.
forward to it. All right,
Yeah,
guys. We'll see you next week.
blessings. Have a good one.
Bye.